My name is Everett Morier. I was born in Binghamton, New York, General Hospital, in 1962. My parents paid $154 for my birth. I was raised in the area. I met my wife there. My kids were born there. And I started writing there. This is me back when I had a neck and hair. Binghamton was a creative place to grow up in. It was also an industrial one, from Endicott Johnson's to IBM to Lockheed to Link. It was this electronics and manufacturing powerhouse. In fact, I made a living for over a decade in that world, in the outside sales of electronics components to subcontractors in the Triple Cities. But then the economic climate began to change, and it continued to change. For us, this transition peaked in 2006, when my company had a nationwide layoff and I was offered a new position in a different industry a few states away. So we sold our home and we moved to Dover, Delaware. We left the Binghamton area. But it never left me. In fact, when my first novel came out in 2015, it was set in part in Binghamton, New York, with some very real places as a backdrop. The book did well. It won the top fiction prize at the London Book Festival. It was named Book of the Year by Heroic Magazine. It was required high school reading, and it even had the film rights sold to it. And it was great having people refer to it as that Binghamton book. When the next book came out, this time a nonfiction, of course it had Binghamton stories and people all throughout it. So when my publisher and I thought about where to pre-launch this new book, we knew where it had to be. We set up a few book signings and book release parties at places mentioned in the book, and it was exciting to go home. See, when the Binghamton area was economically strong, it had an equally strong arts community, which is common during good financial times. But when that economic strength left, the art side usually fades as funding is pulled. But here it didn't. In fact, it thrived. It even grew. Space that was now unused for manufacturing became galleries and studios. Poetry readings were held in the back rooms of bars, and large music events were organized on neighborhood porches and homes. Mosaic artists and industrial artists began to change the face of the city, and it kept on growing. At one time, people flocked to Binghamton to find those lucrative manufacturing jobs. Now they were moving there to not only be part of this new artistic thing, but to have it all around them. But how did this happen? What's the driver for this, the secret sauce? Why does Binghamton have the creative thumbprint that cities so much larger don't have? So while on a 2-day book launch for a book with Binghamton roots, I wanted to take a film crew along with me to meet some of the most influential people in this art scene. The people that are actually doing it. To try and determine what is so special about that place. Why is Binghamton so creative? And that's what we did.
Let's go down to Binghamton when our work is done. Let's go down to Binghamton and watch that setting sun. Save a place for me down at the bar, down at the Union Hotel. Save a place for me down at the bar, a place that I know so well.
So we spoke on the phone yesterday. First of all, you've got this poet name, right? It's J. Barrett, but Barrett's your real name.
Barrett is what I go by.
And you go, and so J is your middle name. J is your middle
Legally speaking, yes.
Okay. So the poet name is J. Barrett Wolfe. Just very good poetic. So I've been researching you. And if I were to create a character that was that beat poet, right? This is how I would create it. I would create him as journalism student. They usually start out a journalism student. They make a living usually in newspaper, radio. Then I would make him a little wanderer. I would have him travel around the country. I would put him on a motorcycle. I would have him work in coffee houses. Then I'd have him need to go to a different country, maybe go to Ireland and study poetry and do this. And that's how I would describe it. And I've just described you. You are all those things.
I have traveled. I have had a wide range of experience. Everything from shoe salesman to police officer.
And I want to get to that too, because that's pretty interesting. So, born in 1954, you are not a Binghamton guy, but you're a New York State guy.
Yes.
You're Long Island, right? We'll forgive you for that. And so you call yourself you call yourself a poet, but you call yourself a wordsmith. What's the difference between the both?
Well, poetry is a fairly specific category of writing, and I do a lot of writing of commentary and just thoughts, and I don't want to limit myself to say, well, I'm only a poet, as if not being just that wasn't a wonderful thing.
Is that a wonderful thing?
I think it's great, but I've done it for a long time and I'm comfortable doing it.
And we were just talking a few minutes ago, there's still that cultural challenge with saying what you do.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we grow up in a society that for the lion's share of the last 75 years, kids in school are handed a book with Yeats or Blake and told this is poetry. So they come out of school thinking there's nothing there that I could relate to. And then they come to an open mic. They wander through a place like the Belmar here in Binghamton, where they're on their way with their drink to the back deck, and there are poets speaking on Thursday night. And they stop and they listen, and sometimes they'll comment or they'll applaud with the crowd, and suddenly they've discovered that poetry isn't what they thought it was. And that's just true across the board. Poetry, it's not what you think. I like to tell the story. I was in Ireland studying at the Irish Writers' Center, and the group of Americans wandered into the local pub. And of course, the local Irish folk hear us talking, know that we're not Irish, and they're, okay, what are you doing here? And we say, we're studying poetry at the Irish Writers' Center. And they would always say one of two things. They would look at you and say, oh yeah, my uncle, my aunt, my sister, my mom, my whatever relative, or I am a poet. Or they would say, oh, say me a poem. They would just want you to demonstrate right there on the spot. Whereas, contrast that to here 10 or 20 years ago, where if you went into a bar and somebody said, what do you do? If you said you're a poet, they would look at you and go, no, what do you do? Right. I mean, it wasn't even on the radar as something one could do. That has been improved a lot by spoken word that can be heard on the internet, on television, radio, rap music. Just that sort of brought that to a younger generation. Mm-hmm. I think the challenge now is everybody who is to pick a number out of the air over 30, and people who haven't been exposed to the various forms of spoken word, which is what we are trying to do here. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read something that I don't know if you wrote this or this was written about you, but it says, "The road called. After a season or so in Boone, North Carolina, playing with the bluegrass musicians, Barrett headed out west to San Francisco, where he worked as a street musician on the waterfront, playing original songs from the tourists." So you went, oh, wait, there's more. One day he asked himself, this is the part I was going to get to. This is, okay. One day he asked himself, what is the most difficult, challenging thing I could attempt at this point in my life? The answer shocked his closest friends. He joined the San Francisco Police Department. A poet that became a cop.
I cut off an 11-inch ponytail to go into the police academy.
What was was it just that the shock value? What's the goofiest thing I could do?
No, it was much closer to what I actually wrote there, and I did in fact write that. I wanted to know what courage was and whether I had any. And I thought, and being someone who said, okay, I can just find the way to test this most effectively, efficiently, and quickly, and that qualified. So I applied, and I got in, and I hold the Bronze Medal of Valor from the San Francisco Police Department for saving someone's life. I was only in the department for a year. It wasn't the job for me, being who I am, but I managed to do some good while I was there.
But you won the Medal of Honor. It's not like you get, I mean, you're...
Well, I did. Yeah. The thing about what people perceive as heroism is almost always it's just doing what's in front of you. I didn't go out of my way to, hunt down some opportunity to win a medal. It never occurred to me for a moment that that would happen. There was just a situation where we wound up having to deal with a guy who was probably deep in some psychological issues and climbed out a window and was hanging outside, and my partner and I had to lean out the window and haul him back in. And that's at risk to our lives. And they gave me the medal.
Do you think about, how often do you think about that, or do you not think about it?
I think for about 10 or 15 years, I put the medal in a drawer and didn't think about it. It was not okay, because even with that amazing accomplishment that, everyone around me, all of my friends were like, wow, that's just stunning. Yeah, but I was sort of pondering why.
Because you didn't deserve it, or because it was so big, or because...
A little bit of all of these things, a little bit of that, a little bit of just the hurt of not being able to do something. I'm pretty good at doing a lot of things. I've done many things, and I've done most of them better than average. Just that's a little bit of hard work and a little bit of luck. Mm-hmm. And that was something that when you walk away from a gig like that, there's some hurt.
You're not ashamed of the medal. You're ashamed in your mind that you didn't finish as a cop.
I'm ashamed of it in terms of I didn't succeed. And succeeding is something that's...
You didn't succeed by your level.
By my standards.
Right.
Yeah, by anybody else's standards, got the medal. You're like, you did the job. I'm a member of a motorcycle club, a law enforcement-based motorcycle club. And getting that medal is just like, yep, you're one of the boys. And it's like, yeah, I get that.
But
my standards are pretty high for accomplishing stuff. In the long view, I have done my life differently than most people do. I did not have one long career for many decades and retire from it. I don't understand the concept of retirement. I've just done my life, and I will continue to do my life until I keel over. And there's no real, you don't retire from this. Many, many, many years ago, an old girlfriend said, I was the best person she had ever met at creating his own reality. Okay. And I think that's true. In the long run, the world has done mostly what I tell it, which is to say, I go into stuff, I put my effort in. I don't just expect the world to be, my oyster, as the old saying goes. I've won awards for poetry because I work very hard to develop the skills to write well.
You started something in the 70s called the Great Cultural Conspiracy.
Some friends and I it was a coffee house that we gave a name to. And that was back when I was a singer-songwriter. Yeah, the logo was, of course, a set of Groucho Marx nose glasses. Okay. Which we occasionally would scare up a set of and wear. And it was just performance. It was almost universally singer-songwriters with occasionally a poet.
talking about policemen, but that's just one of the things you've done. You list them here as factory worker, musician, private investigator.
After the police department, I came back to New York City and took a job with a private investigating company in New York City for a while.
Again, these are not your typical things that are on a poet's resume.
I do what's interesting to me. I like to learn more things I don't know. I'm currently teaching myself how to refinish furniture, how to repair antique radios. Anything I don't know that I could learn is very interesting to me.
So the Highway Poets Motorcycle Club.
Yes.
There's a group of motorcycle poets out there.
Yes, there are.
How many are there?
I don't know. The organization, the membership comes and goes, and I mean, this is bikers who write poetry. It's a cat herd, and it's really hard to know who's in, who's out, what they're doing. You know, we don't get together and do gigs anymore. For a while, we would do that, and that gets to be even difficult because it means you got to rope everybody into be here at a certain time, be ready to read, and that's hard with bikers. But yeah, we used to travel, and of course, time takes its toll. One of my friends who was president of the club for a while died of cancer about 5 years ago. We used to travel. That was when I was living on Cape Cod, and we used to jump on the bikes and go up to Boston or go out to Worcester and read in places there.
We were talking on the phone yesterday, and we're in Binghamton. We're doing a Binghamton book signing about Binghamton books, and we're doing a documentary about Binghamton. And you said, you were not prompted to say this, by the way. You said, "I'm not from here, but I love it here."
And yes, wow. This is the first place that I lived that I settled into a sense of home. It's the right size city for me. It has everything I want in terms of there's good food, good company. I play pool in the local leagues here, and we've been successful. I've been to Las Vegas 3 times now. Again, another one of those things where I learned a skill. I started playing pool 5 years ago, and now I look back and we do well. This is all about the experience of Binghamton for me. And there's a burgeoning arts community. We have a whole bunch of poets, some of whom are very good. We're a crowd of people who get published regularly, who do more events. And this is a place that I don't have any interest in leaving, not to mention that I'm attempting to create a literary center for the Southern Tier here because it's the one art form that we don't have a physical plant for. You know, there isn't a place to do that, whereas there are places to do, you know, all the other art forms. There's an organization for that. So we're in the process of creating one for literature.
So, Chris Nickerson,
Yes.
You were born in Binghamton,
I was.
a hospital that no longer exists.
Yes.
Which we're going to verify this, so you might be lying about that.
Oh no.
And then you moved. When did you move to Florida? When you were
7.
You were 7. Yeah. Why did the family move to Florida?
I don't know. I just followed along. My mom and my stepfather, wanted to move to Florida, so I just went.
And did you graduate high school in Florida, or?
I did. Well, I didn't actually graduate. I didn't graduate. I went into the Marine Corps from Florida.
Okay.
In the Marine Corps, I got my GED. I then went to South Carolina for a year at college, transferred to Binghamton when I got out of the Marine Corps, because my mother had moved back to Binghamton while I was in the service. So I stayed with her, moved back here, and went to school at Binghamton. That's where I got my degree.
Which is not that's no to go from a GED, not to belittle it, that's...
I was kind of upset because I took the GED and I realized I could have, 2 years ago, I could have passed the GED. I was not good in school.
But you got your degree from Binghamton. That's not easy to do.
Well, you mean at Binghamton University?
Right.
Well, I was a theater major.
Yeah, still, don't take that away from yourself.
No, I'm saying I thrived. You know, that was my thing. In high school as well, I started doing theater in high school. I won representative senior in my high school, and I didn't even graduate. But I had a huge picture in the yearbook because of the theater department. You know, I got this.
That's like being the governor of the state you don't live in.
Exactly.
So as a theater major, I mean, what does a theater major want to do? I mean, do they want to direct? Do they want to?
Well, I started acting, of course, but then over the years, I really discovered a desire to direct, as so many of us actors do, and to me, directing is acting every role. Because as I'm directing, nobody can move on stage without knowing why they move there, what their motivations are, why they're doing what they're doing. So it's a way of being able to live through the life of every character. So I love to direct, but it's also a lot more pressures. I almost, everything else sort of fades away in my life. It's all-encompassing. I guess like a painter would have with his painting or whatever like that. When you direct, that piece becomes everything.
Do you think you could be the actor that you are now if you didn't have that degree?
No.
Really?
No. I learned so much.
So an actor that comes in and says, I went out to high school and I went and I did Shakespeare in the Park and I've been acting just as long as you have, but I don't have that degree. You're saying right now that they're not at your level.
I wouldn't say that because as far as...
Trying to get people to get mad at you is what I'm trying to do.
I see that. As far as being an actor, I think you can be a great actor and not have a lot of training, because you can be trained forever and not really be a great actor, because there's that spark, that thing. But directing, being able to tell other people where to move, what to do on the stage, requires a knowledge that you don't gain just by acting. You know what I mean? Maybe if you're an actor who decides to direct and can learn things from other directors, and you can become just as knowledgeable. But when I went to school, I studied with people who directed for years, and I learned from them. It's sort of like an apprenticeship if you're a carpenter or something like that. I guess if you work long enough to be a carpenter on your own, you could, but you have so many mistakes, and there's so many ways a person can teach you things that they've learned that you can't find. It would take so much longer on your own to learn them.
Okay. As far as, I'm going to ask this in a couple different ways. For a Binghamton audience, a theater in Binghamton, what's the Binghamton audience as far as quantity? Do you get the number of people in those seats in Binghamton that you want to?
Not all the time. Occasionally, you do. A society that's more into theater is usually a much more educated audience. If you do a musical on campus, I've seen some really big productions on campus. Okay, they've done Rent, things like that, and they get good crowds.
Because of the network of people?
Of people who go to see it, people who know about the college. The cider mill is a whole thing that I went through, because I started with the cider mill back in the 80s when I was at college, and the college was part of the cider mill. I mean, the cider mill was owned and run by the college. And we had 3 seasons. We did summer season, winter season, fall season. It was always packed. But then the college stepped out of it, and then it was sort of like a private entity. And now there's a group called Clock Tower Theater Company based in Scranton who's using the cider mill stage as a place. And we just had our opening season last year. We're still trying to create an audience. Houses are small. I did a one-man show there just a couple months ago. Very small house, but one-man shows are hard to sell.
One-man shows have got to be hard to do.
They are a challenge. That's what I love doing. This is the 3rd time I've done it. I've done it in Ithaca as well. The funny thing is, I think for actors, there's a lot more opportunity now. I just finished 4 days of background shooting on Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Really?
Yeah, they filmed it in Hancock, which is, like half an hour, 40 minutes from here. And it was great. I loved it. Good pay, but it's how often does a show like that come up here,
Right.
to film?
So you were an extra?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's background.
Well, that
yeah,
was fun.
it was fun. Long days. They work you hard. It was like 14-hour days, but they pay pretty well, and I got to see Tony Shalhoub and
So do you have to, as an extra, you've got to be doing something, right? You're not just walking by, or you're
basically walking by.
walking by.
They'll do a shot, and they'll be filming the main characters doing a scene, and you'll go to your original position, and they'll start, and you'll have a place where you're supposed to go, or a person you're supposed to meet up and talk with in the background, and then walk this way. It's all set out, and then they cut, go back to your original position, you shoot it again. They change the camera angles to get the other character, back and forth kind of thing. So there's a lot of repetition, but it's it's fun work.
Other people that were doing it with you, were they actors or were they just, hey?
It was a combination. There was a lot of people I knew from the theater community. I hung out with probably 10 people that were all actors in the area. But then there was a lot of people who hadn't done anything before. They just thought it'd be fun,
And it was probably listed someplace, and they.
Oh yeah, they had a big audition at the Forum. There was hundreds of people in line. The Forum was probably half filled, 800, 900 people there. So, yeah, they had tons of people to choose from. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I worked at a dinner theater in Arizona. I lived in Arizona for 11 years. After college, I moved there, and I did theater there. And there was this great, huge dinner theater. There's like 3 or 4 of them. It's a chain of dinner theaters, 500 seats. Huge, and they did huge musicals and huge shows, but they had lots of money. And this was quality stuff. It was very, very good stuff. I'm part of a new play festival. They've been doing, like 3 times a year, we do a short new play festival, like 7 or 8 short plays in one night. And that's really interesting to me, and I love working on that because they're all new plays. They haven't been done before, and they're short. It's almost like a skit show, like a Saturday Night Live kind of thing. But you get dramas and comedies, and for a while we had a good run of a regular audience who'd come because it was different, and some things were short, which we're more ready to get involved with. Well, I think what Binghamton has is it's got a lot of people who want to do theater, and they don't always get an audience, but there's a lot of choices of theaters to go see.
Jeff Kahn, so you are the owner. We are at the Cyber Cafe. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting us film here. So we're on the 2nd floor, the Cyber Cafe, and I've got 1,000 questions for you.
I have 1,001 answers.
So you are a Long Island guy originally.
Originally.
Where? What part?
Garden City South.
Okay.
Which people might know Garden City. Garden City South, nothing like it. It's not related.
Nassau County?
Nassau County, kind of in the center. Okay. West Hempstead, Franklin Square, Hempstead, right in there.
So you came to Binghamton because Binghamton University.
Transferred to Binghamton University, graduated, left for 2 years, came back for grad school, 86 to 88. Okay. 3 incompletes away from a master's, quite proud. Stayed.
So was it 85 or 86 that you stayed?
I was here, it's actually 80, I came back in 86, I left in 84. So 85, I wasn't here for a minute.
Okay, so here's a great jumping off point. So Binghamton 2018 and Binghamton 1984, what's the difference? Describe Binghamton 1984.
When I first came to Binghamton, which would be actually 81, by that time frame, I was struck, it felt like it was in black and white. The Twilight Zone connection to me came before I knew there was a connection with the Twilight Zone. It took a minute. I think I acclimated to what it was. I mean, coming from a land of good pizza, when they first gave me pizza here, when they recommended go to, I shouldn't say Pudgy's, but Pudgy's, we got it, we threw it out. It was unedited. It was white bread with ketchup. It was terrible. 2 years later, it's all right. Pudgy's is okay. It's fine. Adapted to that over time, and certainly the downtown I would sort of disappear and now come back. When I was first here, lots of engineers, lots of business. I had worked on Washington Avenue, and there were IBMers checking their stock. This is the
What did you
late
do on the
80s.
Avenue?
I worked at today's Computer Business Center, became Cyber City. We moved,
Yep.
we burned down, moved again. Then I started this 21 years ago. But I got to see when there were IBMers to like none. So Binghamton, then when the country evidently had some sort of peak and then crash, I think Binghamton was nicely stayed at the bottom, so we didn't have that up and down roller coaster ride. We just stayed right there at subsistence level.
So it's a good thing being in the bottom of the bucket, is what you're saying.
You don't have the drop. Yeah. It's the fall that kills you.
So that time period, that 80s, because I remember that time period. I mean, if you worked at IBM, you were a king in this area. I mean, you were just, it was connected to everything. If you didn't work for IBM, you worked for one of the subcontractors, or you worked for someone who was trying to sell to them.
And there was all the defense contractors, and there was a lot here. But I think that was somewhat separate from the Binghamton community. And one thing that was also separate from that time, and it's only now adjusting by necessity, the college and the town, they separated themselves out. Is that a towny place? Is that a college place? A SUNY place, as they call it. And it was very separate. And there was somehow the college was not accepted as a thing until they lost all of the business. And even now, as the cafe struggles, and I've spoken to some young people that think as well, why don't you make this what we want, and then we'll come? It's like, we like this new game here. We want this thing. There's a push to being to catering to a certain demographic. And I'm like, my whole thing is, I do what I want, bring in the music and the art that I like, and hope there's enough people that share my interests. Not the way to run a business. Suffers for it, but that is the approach. I don't know how to cater. Students are welcome. They're an important part of what happens here, especially grad students. But anyway, that is part, but I didn't separate. The community includes that. This town, if you talk about art and your music, there was always art and music. There was always great bands. There are great bands now. There were great bands then. The question is there an audience? Is there an audience to support the artists? And that,
But it's funny though, because my perspective, I mean, I grew up in this area the same time that you started everything. And I don't remember that, and maybe I'm looking at it differently. I remember those bands, and I remember those things, and I remember it there, but I'm seeing it bigger now than it was then. But that could be, maybe I just wasn't looking at it in the same place that you were looking.
I'm also looking at, I grew up. Well, I should have grown up. Bands, when I was in college, going to see a band was an activity. When growing up in high school, listening to music, listening to a record was a sport. It was something we did, among other things. Combined, it was something we did, new music and all that. Of course, there's always been music. But having someone check out new music, I bring in bands no one has heard of. We just had a guy from Memphis here on Wednesday. And no one knows him. I mean, if it was a band, then they bring their friends. That's how bars work. Here's your band, you bring your friends, they drink, I don't care what you do. I'm bringing things no one heard of. That, for the person who wants to experience some new music and support that, and I do it too many days a week, I have seen that. There was like one person there for the guy in Memphis. It's free. So I'm sure there are things happening outside my bubble. In my world, that is the part.
So if I'm your banker right now, I'm saying you got to stop doing that. You got to bring in Bill's local band, and make him required for bringing 50 of his friends. And what do you? I mean, obviously.
Well, I've suffered. I've had that pressure and all that, and I have barely survived and may not survive. I think that question is a real thing. I have karaoke now. I was against karaoke. That's a compromise. Once I had it, I realized it's a fun thing. I was a snob. I changed my opinion on it. But I did it because let me do something that might attract people. So there is compromise that is driven by, as you say, the banker or reality, or, there's art, there's money. I haven't compromised enough. I haven't compromised quickly enough. There are certain things I stubbornly, why bother to have a business that makes no money and do what I don't want to do when I could fail at what I want to do? But it was never driven by the money. I added beer and wine years into this to keep the music going. I didn't have music to sell beer and wine. I did things backwards. But someone who's interested in the business and the side of it, please, hurry. Here's my number.
When you look at the name, I mean, you're talking 21 years ago. There were a lot of places called Cyber this and Cyber that.
Cyber Cafe was a thing. In '97, when we opened up and had internet access and network games and all, it was a thing. And it was like part of our business. We had a cafe, we had music, we had a cyber cafe. We were a pretty big building.
There's some fascinating stuff about you, and I want to skip this because I want to get to the really one I got to ask you about. So there have been a couple articles you wrote about. There's an event. There's a beer run that SUNY does, and that every year. And that's a couple of articles about your solution to this as far as a bouncer. You brought in your mother.
Yes.
As a bouncer.
Yes.
More than once.
Oh, she was doing it for years. She's passed. No, so thanks. She was helpful in a lot of ways to this place.
How old was she when she was doing it?
Well into her 80s. I mean, up until she, 87, she was at the door telling him, to drink it or drop it,
And never an issue.
Well, think about it. You have to be. I don't think you could be drunk enough to start up with a grandmother. Right. I mean, that's just. There's nowhere to go. I used to have a guy who was a bouncer, Ted Tree, his name, 6'7", huge man. Great man, huge man. I mean, just built on another scale. People would start trouble with him. They had beer muscles. I mean, you never start with Ted. He's a great man. He's a violent man. You'd never think to start with Ted. People would start with Ted. They would never start with my mother. All she had to use was that mother voice. No, it's much better use. She was great.
Story ever? Did she enjoy it?
Oh, she loved that. She just always wanted to be useful. When she wasn't her one day of year at pub crawl, what you're talking about, she'd sit in the corner and just talk to people and embarrass me or whatever she could do.
Yeah, moms are good at that.
She was good at that. Exceptional.
This is a historic building.
Not officially, but it goes back to the 1890s, and it was the largest speakeasy in the area.
That's what I want to talk to. So tell me about that. You were doing some expansion, or you were doing something?
No, the actual, my great phone call. Friend Dan there was in the parking lot, there's some cement, and there was a hole. Like some of the cement fell in, but you could just fell in about a foot. So Dan was going to take a sledgehammer, fill it in, hits it, smashes in, it goes down into a hidden room, another 8 feet down in the parking lot. It's still there. Hidden room. It was a hidden room with it had a trap door in the cement. It used to have a tunnel that went to our basement, and there were remnants of kegs, copper funnels, pitchers. So it was from Prohibition times. And this thing had been closed since probably the 30s. And the tunnel's been closed in. So I'm home and I get a call. I'm like, what is it? And it's early, and I'm like, it's nothing good. Right. Secret tunnel under your thing. I'm there, And if you remember Al Capone's vault, we did slightly better than that, which was the end of Geraldo's career. But he lingers on. But it was like, I was disappointed it wasn't gold, money, bodies even. But we have few things. And then what came out of that was the history. My neighbor in Vestal, he used to come here with his dad and his grandfather worked Laura. They took over Laura Brewery, which is now Bates Troy, across the street. They'd come to speakeasies. They paid off the authorities. He was here as a kid, going to speakeasies. And there was that story. This is my 90-year-old neighbor, and how you doing? His whole thing about, Prohibition and that whole history. So for a time, that was a thing, until I said it for the 1000th time in that story. It's been a while now, so it's okay. Until that grew old.
But the cool part is you're not a hardware store that discovered that. You're not a bowling alley that discovered that. You're a cafe/bar that discovered that. That's just kismet. I mean, that's the coolest thing in the world.
it was cool. I just, I thought for a second I should exploit it, have a museum, have a tunnel. I'm just, they opened up a fake speakeasy downtown. It's nicer. It's great. That works. It's like.
Did you save some of the things that you?
Oh, it's in my office. Sure. Yeah. I've got a copper funnel. I've got some, giant bottle, jugs, and the stuff's still there. Every once in a while, we'll open it up and someone could go down there. It's built, steel reinforced concrete. It was put together.
Tim Gleason, I have you listed as actor, manager, and founder of the No Theater. All of those are correct. All of those are true. Yes, but I've got a bunch of questions for you. You are by training an engineer. You were an engineer.
You've been doing your homework, yes.
Was that in Scranton?
Some in Scranton, and some came up across the border to work for IBM as a subcontractor.
So what type of engineering?
Electrical was my flavor, yeah. So
I don't even know where to go from an engineer to the director of a theater.
I bumped my head. No, that's a good question. It's quite a leap. Most people, it baffled many people when I was a waiter in New York that they'd go, "What are you doing?" I guess I was doing what I needed to do at the time. As I look back, I mean, I was proficient enough to keep myself in employment. But I used to dabble way back when with stand-up comedy and impressions. And I guess I had a foot in, and I didn't know that that was the foot that all of my real weight should be on. I switched companies. The job shopping thing, when IBM started getting a little skittish, I got into a real regular firm up here. And of course, I'm wasting more time than I'm working. Sometimes it felt that way. So all of my colleagues would say, go to the open mic nights and do this shtick you're doing for us all day. And I somehow had this fear. I couldn't do it. So
did you not want to do it, or were you afraid to do it?
I was afraid.
Okay.
I still haven't totally figured it out, because what I do now is totally different.
Right.
So I saw an acting class, Richmond class, not a official college class, on the campus at BCC.
You're still an engineer at this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I said, well, if I take this class, it had the word improvisation in the description, and it was clearly said acting class, but I said improv. I can maybe knock this wall down. I can get back to being an idiot in front of people on purpose. And I took the class, and my teacher, who is still to this day my mentor, I never broke that wall down, and I never went that way. I did sort of transition into acting, which I never wanted to.
Why?
It was never on my radar. Never crossed my mind.
Do you get pleasure out of it?
Now? Oh my God, I can't live without it.
But you didn't think you would then?
No, I had no idea. So I took the class, and I had this big breakdown and admitted why because I made up some phony reason why I was there, and then it filled me with, and you had the comfort of being in a role.
Yeah.
Stand-up, when you stink, you stink. So it's more direct when people don't like you.
But what is that about the audience? What is that? Is that ego? What is that?
I teach youngsters now, and there's definitely an arc to it. When I started, it was all about look at me.
Mm-hmm.
Where I am now is what can I do to you? But it's quite a...
From way over here. What can I do from you from way on this stage?
Yes.
Okay.
And at first, way back, and I tell the kids flat out this, right now you're being driven by, where do you see me up there? But when you really get a taste of the power of what we do, how it can affect people's lives, you start to change. So now, certainly you have to have some kind of an ego to want to get up there. But I'm driven at this point in my life to how I can move and affect other people's lives, which is why I have a theater.
So when you meet that typical actor, and you've met them, How do you handle that typical actor? That look at me, let me show you. Like, how do you?
That's a good question. It's a slippery slope because you certainly don't want to squelch that and squash it in any way.
Are you immune to it? Does it?
Me as an actor, no. Because now more of my fulfillment comes from people saying that play that you just did, as opposed to me. You know, I've had plenty of those, and it's lovely. But I like it more when they say that show really moved me, disturbed me, angered me. Yeah, that's what I really get off on today.
So that's also some proof that you've moved away from that you don't have that.
Yeah, it's an evolution. It's in there because I certainly love when you're inside of a scene or a play and you really knock it out of the park. It feels wonderful. But I don't need anyone to come up and say, you were amazing. You know, if they do, I thank them.
How do you manage people that do? Because there's got to be.
Yeah, well, that's why, as I said with my students, I put it right in front of them early on and know that I'm going to be talking to you about this. When they first talk to me, they might not know, but I always say it's going to happen, that you're going to come off the stage and a mother's going to come up or a father and go, because of what I saw you do, I'm going to go home and call my daughter. I haven't talked to her in a year. And then you feel the power and the responsibility of this thing that we do. So I try not to step on their toes. And if they really want to do this, they sort of begin to understand. I've never had an instance where somebody went like, well, you know, it's never been that way.
I've never had anyone explain it to me like you just did. That's the most honorable way I've ever had that explained. Because anyone else was going to say, "Oh, I was moved by what you did to make me," but you didn't say that. You said being part of the message of the whole.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at the beginning, you're not thinking that,
right?
Because there's so many components to this thing we do. It's so simple, it's complicated. I say that like I have $1 every time I said that. But once you taste the power and the responsibility you have from up there, it changes how you do it. And that's what I try and build into my students, starting as young teenagers, and hopefully get them into college. And by the time they get there, if nothing else, I've helped them build a base to grow upon. And I didn't plan it to be where I am as far as how I feel about it, but through time, you know, it's what can you do to the people. But if you throw honesty at them, they can't block it. So you're getting in at them even if they think they came to be entertained. You get to them. And I pick shows that they don't have much choice but to get some paint on them.
I've never seen acting explained so honorably before.
Well, thank you. You're stealing some of my words that I tell these kids. It's very honorable. It's courageous. You have to be very brave up there because you can pretend you're someone, but if you do it correctly, you are being that someone. And in order to do that, you have to bear who you are. As Paul Newman, a famous quote, he said, if you want to be an actor, you have to show your ass. And that's what it comes down to. It has to be you. Now, the people in the audience do not stop to go, oh, look how good he is. That's just him. Because if you're doing it right as well, they're caught up in the story. You have that guise of that character, right? In the stand-up, it's like, you suck. When you're in a part, they can go, I don't like that guy. Oh, yeah, me neither. Yeah. But it's really just you that you're putting forth if you do it right.
How do you choose? I mean, when you choose a play to get that reaction, when you choose a play to get that lady say, "I'm going to call my daughter," you know, you don't choose it just by shock. How do you choose it?
Yeah, no, I've been doing this. The theater's been in existence for 26 years now. And I just, I spread my arms and look to the sky, and I look for things that really move me as an individual, whether they upset me, whether they make me laugh. and try and have some kind of a pulse on the kind of things that people normally don't like to talk about.
Have you ever chosen wrong? Have you ever chosen one where it just didn't get the reaction you wanted?
Not that I've been alerted to, because any reaction is, if you have scales out, I'm winning, right? I'd get emails and say, me and my wife saw that play, we hated it. We stayed up for 6 hours talking about it. I win, yeah. So, and then, if I'm feeling really, a little intense about it, I'll say, how about the acting? Well, that was great. No, it's just that story. And I go, all right, now I'm really good. So far so good, knock on wood. I've never had anything that felt like it fell flat.
So we've been talking, and I haven't even opened the page yet of all this stuff, but the No Theater you created.
Yes. Yeah.
And what year was that?
1992. Yeah.
And I've got to ask, because you didn't answer in any of the reading, what's the feather?
It's been there since the beginning. We did our very first show, which, going back to that ego-driven actor that started this thing, we did our very first show was Night of the Iguana by Tennessee Williams. Now, why would a guy like me want to play someone who drinks too much, is disillusioned with the religion, and likes to chase young girls? I don't know. But here we were. So we put together a cast for that. Strictly, I first approached Angelo Zuccolo at Broome and said, hey, I'd love to do the show. And he goes, I don't know if I want to do it. And I was like, come on. And I gave him the whole cast. I said, all these people. And he goes, if you really want to do it yourself. And we laughed. And I said, why can't I? Well, there was many reasons, if I look back, that I shouldn't have. But on we went, and we were in the landmark church, which was the Centenary United Methodist Church at the time, at the corner of Centenary Avenue, right downtown. Didn't know them from Adam. I knocked on their door and said, I heard you have a space. And within an hour, the lady handed me a key, which blows my mind. And we went in and did the show. So there's a beautiful loft theater up behind the organ, upstairs. So it was a young gentleman who helped me start the theater, one of the founders, named Larry Gadisi. We were working on our set one afternoon, him and I, which was pretty much crates that we went and picked up somewhere and cut in half and made a railing out of. We had nothing. And Larry and I were lamenting. My brother, God rest his soul, died when he was 48. So I said, Larry, my brother, never got to see me on stage. He was an engineer as well. So I said, we worked together, but when I found this, he was so busy, he never got here. And Larry said, my mom never got to see me either. So I just offhandedly said, well, they can come to all the shows now, right? So on we went. And people think this is like Hollywood made up, but it's the truth. We were sitting around on opening, final dress in a circle. Some in the seats, some on the front of the stage. And we're going, okay, I'll get here at 6 o'clock to start setting up for tickets. And down from the ceiling, in this tongue-and-groove wooden ceilinged room, floated a white feather. And it landed on the floor in the middle of the circle, and me and Larry just went like, oh my God. So Larry at that point had also made our posters, so the very next poster, because I was ready, I was done. We did that, and I was like, I'm out. And they were like, we can't stop. And away we go. And now they're all gone, and I'm still here. But he put a feather on the poster, and it's been there ever since. We're being looked out for by something greater. Yeah, so, yeah, if you come to the theater, there's feathers stuck in here, over there, on the piano, on our business card. Yeah, so it's become our symbol.
Pretend for a second that I'm a total moron.
Okay.
What is musicology?
It's basically the study of music history. You can sort of more consider it, if you want to get a little more nuanced with how you describe it, it's the study of music in context. So there are three-ish disciplines in music, in academic music. One of them is music theory, one of them is ethnomusicology, and then there's musicology. So So musicologists tend to study historical music trade sphere. Some people do more music criticism. Newspapers haven't been hiring full-time music critics quite so much lately, so that career path has dried up a little bit. It used to be a little bit more available.
Do you have to have a scholastic background to be a music critic?
No, you don't. Some people don't, but music can also get kind of technical, so you do need a lot of training to understand how music notation works and what the conventions are and stuff like that. So it helps to know something about music, but you don't need a PhD in musicology.
So, as a musicologist, how many instruments do you play? Instruments? Do you play everything?
I was trained conservatory style in the clarinet. I quit playing the clarinet in my early 20s, so like 15 years ago. I have since started to play Irish music. So I play Irish flute and tin whistle around town. So that could be another reason.
See, I wanted to learn an instrument, but I didn't have any talent, so that's why I play the ukulele.
Oh.
Because once you become 50 and you're overweight and you don't golf, you have to play the ukulele.
Is that it? It's either golf or the ukulele.
Or bowl. You could bowl.
You can bowl?
Substitute bowl.
I have to tell you that I know a lot of people who are over 50 and don't bowl, play the ukulele, or golf.
No, you don't. They secretly want to do one of them. They're in denial. If you ask them, if you ask them.
Are you in a ukulele orchestra?
I am. I'm in the Smyrna Ukulele Band.
Smyrna, Delaware?
Smyrna, Delaware.
Oh, I'm from Delaware.
Where are you from?
Newark.
Okay.
I went to the University of Delaware.
That is so weird.
To Dickinson High School.
Okay. Yeah, we lived up here. We lived in Vestal up until 2006, and I took a job with a company that relocated us,
Okay.
and we chose Dover, Delaware,
Okay.
because we like Amish people in NASCAR.
That's a good place for you. And being kind of close to the beach.
That's right. Where I could flourish my ukulele career.
Yeah.
So Binghamton is definitely an academic town. What is from does your husband work at the university too?
No.
Okay.
No. He's like a full-time folk singer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is he? How do you separate that? Because you work for a university, you teach at the university. Is there a separate between I'm now leaving the university and going into town, or is it all just one big university town? I mean, is it all mingled?
That's a good question. That is a really good question. I do feel like there's a town-gown divide in Binghamton. And I am the kind of person who has always obviously been really involved in academia, but for me it's really important to know people, to hang out with people who aren't necessarily involved in academia, because it can be such a bubble. So, I married somebody who's obviously not an academic. And we both kind of consciously craft a way of hanging out with people and being involved in the community beyond that. So we live in an area of town we live on the north side, which is like the area of town where the fewest professors live. I think it's me and one other social.
Was that by design? Did you choose? Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we first moved here, we rented a house on the west side, like a lot of professors do. And then we sort of sat there and consciously thought about where to move that would be a neighborhood that's diverse, that didn't feel like necessarily we were bringing gentrification with us. Because I also I lived in Bed-Stuy in 2005, 2006 in New York City, and they've had a lot of gentrification problems. So, I mean, I know Binghamton's like a totally different city than Brooklyn in the mid-aughts, but, we wanted to find a neighborhood where it felt like if we moved in, we wouldn't necessarily be contributing to gentrification, but it's also diverse, and it doesn't have a lot of academics. And we found that on the north side. So,
What's so funny is I always said I wanted to write a check to Greenpoint, Brooklyn, because it got me out of so many fights when I lived in Long Island. Because they would say, "Where are you from?" And I used to say Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Oh, sorry, no problem. So one of these days I'm going to have to buy them a library or something to pay them for them. But two people that I've met today have blown my idea of what I thought were these people. And one was an actor that was here that was just an amazing guy. And you're a PhD, but you're not what I expected you to be.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
Are most PhDs what I expect them to be? Are they?
I do have elbow patches.
I did notice that. Is that required with your PhD?
I did kind of buy it because I was like, oh, it's a professor jacket.
Because with a bachelor's, I wouldn't be able to get it. It wouldn't work. You have to have a PhD to have that jacket.
It's something I love. I love music. I do this because I have been passionate about music since I was extremely small. And so there's these questions about whether, what qualifies as work, you know? So if I read a friend's book, if I go on vacation but I take a friend's book that's about music history with me and read it, is that working? If I go to a concert, if I go to a concert by students, is that working? If I go to a concert here in the community, is that working? You know, there are just all of these questions about it, but it's a really intense job.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, when you know something as deeply as you do you get to the point where you don't enjoy the other part of it? Are there musics that you can't? I have a friend that I directed several plays with, and he plays every instrument that there is, and he can only listen to classical music because if he listens to this, and I'm going to say it wrong, he's listening and he's hearing 4/3/9, so he's just seeing, he can't enjoy it anymore. Does that happen to you?
No.
It doesn't.
No, and I listen to a lot of music, a lot of different kinds of music.
You don't, that filter has never been.
I just love music.
Just love it.
Yeah.
Because you've got the matrix glasses to the music. You can see the binary code of the music. You can see it all, but you still enjoy it.
Very much.
Wow.
Yeah. I do, when I get a massage, I ask the massage therapist to turn off the music. Because that's like, it feels a little too much like my job is being brought into this massage.
It's always around.
Right, yeah. But no, I love music.
Binghamton was this industrial entity. Yeah. There was money everywhere. Everybody was happy. And when there's money everywhere, there's funding and there's arts and there's everything. And then that went away. But the art scene seemed to stay here. And you can say, well, part of it is the university. Well, that's true, but it's not a technically art school. It's a science, but we're still trying to figure out what the secret sauce is that makes Binghamton the art community that should be, that the community here should be a city twice its size. It's kind of bizarre that it's great that it is. What's your theory of what drives it? Why is it here?
I would agree with you. I have only been here for a little while, and I'm a transplant, and I have consistently been so surprised at how many artists and musicians are here, how many art galleries are here, how extensive events like the First Fridays are. We have an opera company, which is very unusual for any town of this size. Even if you include the population of the Tri-Cities area, it's still an extremely small sort of metropolitan area to be supporting a professional opera company, right? Yeah. It's very unusual. The flip side of it is, for me, coming in as an outsider, is that it's absolutely astounding to see what people do with all of the open space and arts institutions that are here. There are institutions like the Bundy Museum that we were just talking about. I love the Bundy Museum. And my husband and I, as we get to know this community, kind of joke around and say, you know, we say this thing that it's just like, whatever you want to do in Binghamton, you just do it, you know? And there's like support for it, and there are these buildings, you know, that where you can afford the space to do whatever you want to do, and there are places like the Bundy Museum, so that it winds up being this, like, it began as an old house, but then they added, you know, they have a radio station, they have art galleries, and they have art showings, and they have an old barber shop, and they have a little Twilight Zone, you know, memorial. They just, whatever you want to do at the Bundy Museum, if they can support it, they'll do that. And that's really an incredible thing about Binghamton. So we're always falling in love with these different institutions.
So, Bruce, how do you pronounce your last name? Is it Grieg or
Greg.
Grieg? And you said that with that New Zealand sort of swarthiness when you just said that. It's like, yeah. So, born in New Zealand,
Yes.
and you lived there until, well, actually until 2011,
Yeah, more or less.
and that was because of you came to this area because of the earthquake.
Yeah. There's a lot of story there, but yes.
Okay, but you've been an artist since you were 16.
Yes.
And how did that start?
I've been a professional artist since I was 16.
You got paid to be an artist at 16.
Well, more or less, yeah. I was a sign painter back in the days when it was all done by hand, you know. Really? Yeah, with paintbrushes. And I loved that job, but the job sort of disappeared. In New Zealand, it's a 5-year apprenticeship, so I did 5 years for a small company, qualified as a sign painter, and within about 6 months of me qualifying, I was invited to our opposition, the other signwriter in town, small town, and they just bought a signwriting computer. One of the first to get into New Zealand. I saw that thing working and I knew straight away that I just wasted the last 5 years.
Really?
Oh, I knew that was the end of signwriting the way we knew it. So, and of course it is.
So if you went back 20 years and there wasn't that computer, would you have been happy as a sign painter?
Oh yeah, I love that job.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely ruined the industry, really. I mean, as far as what I do, the artistic side of it, you know.
When we were asking you to put a label on what you do, you skipped over mural artist and you went to industrial artist. Is that so what's an industrial artist?
Well, it's a term I really made up because it really suits what I do more than anything else I can think of. But I mean, one reason I've survived as an artist for 40-something years is that I've adapted and I've done all sorts of things. Obviously, I started as a sign painter. That got taken over by computers. I became a mural painter in the signwriting industry. And that grew a lot, but I mean, over the years I've worked in a lot of movies, particularly in New Zealand in the movie industry there.
I want to talk about that, not just some movie. I mean, so you've been involved in some big movies.
Yeah.
So, which rolls around Peter Jackson, correct?
Yeah, all movies in New Zealand come around Peter Jackson.
Sir Peter Jackson. Yeah, he is. So he's the gravity that everything follows around in. How did you meet Peter Jackson?
Well, I've never actually met him.
Okay.
I nearly ran him over once on set.
Well, that counts. How'd you almost run him over?
Well, I wasn't actually driving, but another guy, we were driving a high-ace van around the set. You just drive around like 5 miles an hour. They had shipping containers stacked 3 high to stop people filming over top of the set because it was outside. And these shipping containers had gaps in them, and Peter jumped out. He just took a shortcut, and he came through one of these gaps, and we were driving right beside the containers, you know, because that's not where people are. Well, he just ran out, and he suddenly realized that we were.
So you could have been the death of Lord of the Rings. Yeah, it would have been on your shoulder. You could have switched him.
Yeah, the trucks screeched to a halt, and Peter froze right in the middle of in front of us, about that far away. And I said to the guy driving, I said, "For God's sake, don't kill him, or we'll get lynched."
Now, you said you'd never met him, but you did paintings in his house.
Yes.
How did that come about?
He actually has a big mansion in the small town I live in, which is an hour north of Wellington, the capital of New Zealand, a little town called Masterton. He lives in a place called Matahiwi, it's just out of Masterton. I knew everyone in Masterton, it's my hometown. A lot of guys there were working there. One of them said he can get me in the door. So I actually went with the electrician that morning when he turned up for work. Once I was in, I asked around, I said, "I'm a mural artist. Can I do some work for you?" I got on to somebody there, and yeah, they gave me a job. Before you knew it,
some of the movies, I mean, you were, and I want to ask you what specifically did. Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, King Kong, Lovely Bones. No. Oh, no, okay. Oh, no, I'm saying Peter Jackson was involved in that. 10,000 BC. Yes. So what did you do? What did you paint?
Well, on all of them, I was employed as different things. But for example, on King Kong, I think it was the first movie I worked, I was a sign painter because they wanted the whole of New York reproduced looking like 1930s. So you had to paint the signs for the They were all hand painted, yeah. All the signs you see in there are hand painted and all done the old school way. And they got like 20 of us sign writers from New Zealand that still knew how to do it, to go down to Wellington and work there for 2 months, painting new signs.
And then you said that was your favorite job anyway.
Well, at the time, I love what I do now, but yeah, back then I loved it, yeah. I didn't want to change. But sometimes change does us good, you know. We get thrown out of our comfortable little boat, and you know.
So if you look at King Kong, all those signs are hand painted in the.
Yes.
Do you remember one specific? Was there anything that was challenged? Do you remember one specifically? That
Yeah, I do. I did. I can't even remember what the wording was now because it was probably 10 years ago. But it was a hero shot. That's when they have one person, and Jack Black was standing outside the Empire State Building, and I did the sign that takes up the whole shot behind them. And when you're a sign writer, you sort of have a signature. I can tell my Helvetica from some other sign writer's Helvetica, just little quirks about it. It's almost invisible, but I can tell it. Yeah, and when I saw it up there on the big screen, and I just knew that was my signature lettering, That's kind of neat. Because I worked on The Hobbit and everything, we painted a lot of stonework on that. So.
What was that like? Was that like work, or was that?
Oh, it was work, all right. Yeah, I used to say we worked the devil's hours. We did 66 hours a week, I think it was, and we worked from 6 in the morning till 6 at night, 6 days a week.
You did do the devil's work, yeah.
So it was hard. It was hard work, and a lot of it, it sounds romantic working on a big movie like that, and it kind of was. I mean, we had some pretty cool moments. I remember having morning tea with Sir Peter, I can't remember the White Wizard guy, Sir Peter something like that.
I know who you're talking about. I can't think of the name.
And I talked to Jack Black a few times. He was very down to earth, actually. And then, sorry, what were we talking about? What was it like working on Hobbit? Yeah. So it was just hard work. I mean, it was sort of fun, but you're like an ant building a castle, It's kind of cool to see it all come together, and it's kind of neat, all these famous people walking around just, talking to you and stuff. And so it was neat like that, and it was amazing to see the sets. I mean, Peter Jackson made 102 sets, I think it was, for the movie. We had about 8 stages, so we could have 8 or 9 sets at any one time. And then some of the sets were in different places. He owns half of Wellington now. So he had all these big, he had an old car factory, he bought that. We built a forest, a whole forest, all the trees, trunks, this thing. Honestly, I would tell you that those trees probably, in real life, they look more real than real trees look. I don't even know. Well, that was how I put it, yeah. It was fascinating making them, just seeing how we did it. I mean, it's kind of common sense when you see it, but they're all made of styrene, cut into strips, made on a big wooden base with wheels so you can move them. And these trees, you've got to think they had root systems that were so big the hobbits could hide in them. They had a whole series of people that were making fungus to glue to the trees. Then we came in and sprayed them all with cement and glue, and then painted them and dyed them and stained them.
It's just you make it sound so nonchalant. It's like, oh, if you do good in the fungus department, we're going to move you up to the leaf department, and then there's an opening over in the trunk department.
Yeah, there were a lot of conversations like that you sort of can't believe you're actually saying this.
You do good, Johnson. We'll move you out of fungus and up to tree boughs.
Yeah, that's it.
So how did you end up in Binghamton?
Well, that's a very long story. I'll try and keep it reasonably short. I always loved the old American cars, okay, 60s Impalas and the likes of that. So when I discovered the internet, and suddenly I found, things are very expensive in New Zealand, so I suddenly found that I could buy Impalas in America for like 3,000 or 4,000 at the time, for 64, 66, something like that. They were 20,000 in New Zealand. So I would buy them on the internet, and when it was winter in New Zealand, it's summer here, so June, July, August, I would come over here, buy 3 or 4 cars, drive them all to Los Angeles, mostly from Illinois. I don't know why, most of the good cars seem to come from Illinois at the time. So I would drive them over to Illinois, and then I would ship them out to New Zealand. Now, in doing that, I ended up in Binghamton for no particular reason. And I saw a house here for sale for like 18,000 or something, so I bought it. And then I just decided I was just going to come back here and stay here because I wasn't really a very good tourist. So when the winter came in New Zealand and I couldn't work, I would come to America. Now, in 2010 and 2011, my city of Christchurch in New Zealand had a major earthquake. It actually had two. It was a little unusual like that. The second earthquake was 4 months later, and it was bigger than the first. Anyway, the government was a little slow on coming forward with help, and I suddenly found I not only had no work, I had no city to even find work, you know. I mean, so I went and worked in the movies for a while, did a whole lot of things. And amongst that, I had my rental house here flooded, and the flood they had here. So I had a flood and an earthquake in 1 year. And yeah, so I came over here because my property manager really wasn't sorting it out. So I came over this way, sorted the house out. While I was here, I met a girl on the internet. And I also met another girl, Katie's her name, and she wanted to be my agent. So then it occurred to me, I've got a freehold house here, I've got work, and I've got a girlfriend. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just...
That's the New Zealand trifecta.
Yeah. Well, it's a good start for a new life when you've just lost everything in an earthquake. So that's really how I ended up here. So I never really chose Binghamton. Binghamton chose me. But I'm happy with it, I love the place.
We headed to the first book signing as we let all the conversations from the day sink in. So what did we learn? Well, one common element with all those we sat down with was a lack of strong artist ego. We really didn't see any of that there. At all. In fact, these people were almost humble, just enjoying what they did and being grateful for the chance to do it. But I think we need to go back even further because there's a clue with how these individuals came together to be interviewed by us that's really important. So how did we get the chance to talk to these people? Well, that's simple. One phone call to a friend of mine in the area, just one. And she reached out to some of her prominent artist friends. And then they all showed up. That was it. These people didn't know me or had ever met me. They just stopped what they were doing and went to help. No questions, no hesitations. All they knew was that someone had a creative project they were working on that needed their involvement, and they all came together. Sort of like an artistic barn raising. And it was done. And I think you can also connect another aspect of the bigger Binghamton formula to this, and the fact that these artists, they also seek out other art to admire. Because if you have artists without an audience, then it just doesn't work. But in this area, the artists were also the audience. They were the producers, but they were also the consumers. So it all just kept on cycling forward. But we had more people to talk to. Emily, is it Jablon?
Jablon.
Jablon. And we are at your studio. Mm-hmm. And you graduated Vestal High School. Mm-hmm. And you went to the University of Vermont.
Yes.
And you majored in Chinese.
Yes, I was a Chinese major.
So you speak Chinese?
Poorly.
What made you take Chinese?
So I was an art major at first when I went to the University of Vermont. And halfway through freshman year, I had a meltdown and I was like, I'm never going to get a job as an artist. I need a job where I will have a skill set. So I need to, have a major where I will get a skill out of it. And I thought Chinese would be a good skill.
So instead of taking engineering or architecture or you chose Chinese as that marketable skill.
Yes, and here I am as an artist.
So how would you be as an artist if you didn't take Chinese? How would your career have changed if you didn't take it? Or would it have gotten here anyway?
It would have been here anyway.
So I want to talk about your background, and I'm fascinating about your mom. And your mother worked at Philadelphia Sales, which is an icon in this area. It was the ultimate department store. And your mother met your father at Philadelphia Sales, who owned Philadelphia Sales, which means I shouldn't even make direct eye contact with you anymore. I mean, you're like the first family of Binghamton. Yeah. So that's how they met. So you must have great memories of Philadelphia Sales growing up, right?
I have wonderful memories.
I remember, anyone that you talk to and you mention Philadelphia Sales in Binghamton, you know the first thing they're going to say?
Popcorn.
Popcorn. You walked in that door and it just surrounded you, that smell. You probably hear that all the time.
All the time.
And you can't, and it was just stores can't duplicate that. I mean, whatever your dad, now did he create that on his own?
He inherited it.
Okay.
And from one store and grew it into 5.
It was now. There were two here, right? There was one in.
Binghamton, Endicott, Johnson City, Waverly, Cortland.
So I didn't know the Waverly Cortland one. So that puts you on a pretty high level. And then your mother was an artist as well.
Yep.
Right? And did she have the space here?
Not until after the flood.
Okay. And then you sort of expanded what she had? Okay. So we were talking a little bit yesterday. We talked with Bruce Grieg yesterday. And do you know what he said about you?
No.
I've been waiting because I wanted to have the right time. And it's just great because I know something that you don't know now, so I'm holding this in. He said, and I quote, "Emily is the only person I met that was born to be an artist." He said that you were that everyone that he's met has sort of fallen into it, and you were the only person that he met that was no doubt about it, that was meant to do that. Do you agree or disagree to that?
I agree 100%.
He, because his story is fascinating, but he will tell you that he had some gifts and stumbled on it and came upon this life that he enjoys, and he's good at it, and he's made a good life. But he says that's not with you. You had to do this some way or the other.
It's true.
And then you also said, we're in your studio and we're looking at all this stuff, but this isn't where your work is. Your work is out there. So some of these, I mean, you said some of these are massive, right? Describe some of this work that you've done.
Some of the mosaics that we've done, they span the entire Riverwalk, hundreds of square feet.
How many individual mosaics? How many individual pieces of glass?
Hundreds of thousands pieces of glass. Yeah. And a lot of them in the beginning we did for free, just to get it going. And then people just started to pay me. But yeah, like some of them we've done a house. I mean, the biggest ones range from 400 to 500 square feet. And there's bigger ones to come.
So when you went from free to pay you, who pays you now? Are these, because these are so big that they're probably, are these committees? Are these?
They're grant works, there's grants, there's fundraising, there's different municipalities, there's different pots to pull from now.
Okay.
So.
And you do a lot, I mean, we read a lot about the work you do with kids.
Yeah, so to do the mosaics this large, I can't do them by myself. So I've created these programs, literally have developed them organically. So what it is now is over the summers, I'll spend 6 to 8 weeks working with at-risk youth, getting them paid as their first job. So they help me create these entire mosaics from the beginning to the end. So it's great for me because I get to do these large, massive public artworks. It's great for the kids because they get to be involved. They get their first jobs. They get a great experience into the workforce. They get all this publicity and all this attention from the media as it's being installed. And it's great for the community because they get these beautiful public, massive mosaics that will last the test of time.
And these kids aren't flipping burgers there. When their work is done, they get to go back to it.
Oh, yeah.
See it. Mm-hmm. How long have you been doing this with the kids?
This is probably my 4th summer doing it with the kids.
So you have a generation that's gone out into the world, right? Are these middle school kids or high school kids or both?
14 to 18.
So though there are like 19, 20-year-olds out there that were in your first, are you still in touch with them?
Oh, yeah. They always come back to me.
What do you get out of it, working with those kids?
It's my favorite thing I do.
Really?
Yeah, and especially the at-risk youth ones. Those are the ones I have, even though they're the most challenging, I find it the most rewarding. And I get to do what I love to do, which is kind of turn Binghamton into a walking art gallery.
Yeah.
And with these kids' help and with the different organizations around town paying these kids, it's doable. Well, from some of the feedback I've gotten from the public art that you see around town is people stumble across it in one of its many 16 locations. And they're like, they get a feeling of like when you're in a museum and you see something beautiful and you're held back or you're inspired or you're brought to tears. And I guess the public mosaics that you see around town have that same effect upon that person without having them to go into a gallery.
Right.
Or
What is Be Inspired, Be Binghamton?
That is what is written along the Riverwalk mosaic. And it was, a very long, skinny mosaic we were working with, and it just seemed perfect for words. And it was a little weird because I didn't realize I would be kind of branding the city, the downtown city. But so I was cautious in the words that we picked.
What are some of the other ones?
I've done the Binghamton Airport. We've done a couple TV shows. We've done Hell's Kitchen, Top Chef.
Really?
Yep.
It's the art here mathematically shouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. The city's too small now, but it is. Mm-hmm. So what's your theory on what the big driver for that reason is?
The artists. And the artists.
Well, why aren't you in Albany, or why aren't you in Chicago, or why aren't they someplace else?
Because it's easy here.
Why?
I'm not really sure why. I think because when we started doing these mosaics, Binghamton was at a spot where it was just starting to turn around. It was almost at like a measurable zero kind of thing. It was almost if like you could be conducting an experiment on a public art space.
So the good news is you can't fail.
The good news is you can't fail, and the good news is it's easy. It was easy to start it, and it was easy to get it going, and it was easy to build the momentum because there was nothing.
So you could argue, so you can't ever tell, but you can argue that if that public art wasn't there, it wouldn't have recouped. The economy wouldn't have recouped because you wouldn't have had those places that wanted to be near that, right?
It definitely at least gives a dead space a new revitalizing breath of fresh air.
A safe fresh air.
A kickstart.
We are in the home of our first married couple artist, which is I've got like 300 questions for you guys. But first I want to make sure that I get your artistic name right. And it's Joanna...
Nope, no way.
Joanne Thorne Arnold.
Correct.
Okay. And David Arnold.
Correct, yeah.
And that is not a Binghamton accent.
No, it's not.
It's...
London, east end of London, east side of London, East London, West Essex, a place called Barking.
And how do you go from Barking to Binghamton, New York?
Through Joanne. She was teaching in the UK. She was one of these people who was clever enough to get a Fulbright exchange, which is a teacher exchange. And back then, the exchange was for a full school year. So she was teaching in the UK. The teacher that she was stepping in for in the UK came here and taught at the school that Joanne was teaching in here, Harpersville. And it went from there. It wasn't until the back end of of her
Let's put it this way. I brought him home as a souvenir.
Okay. So she's saying, too long-winded. That's the story.
Now, what year was that?
Let's see, I taught there 1992, 93.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
we're gonna bounce around because I have so many questions for you guys. So and we were talking about Binghamton and the art scene and coming from a different country. Describe and your artistic people, and I'm also seeing banjo picks over here, and then I see a banjo over there. So this is a very, very artistic house. Is Binghamton? Does Binghamton fit for that culture? Does Binghamton fit for your lifestyle in that?
I think Binghamton is the catalyst for our lifestyle, to be quite honest. Prior to coming to the States 24 years ago, I never had any artistic bent at all. I go by the old adage, being married and living and being involved in Joanne's environment. It came like, if you can't beat them, join them. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go for pottery classes, and it has gone from there.
Because she really started it, right? You were in Ithaca when he first mentioned the pottery idea?
Correct.
Yeah, I was at a residency at the Sultan Stall.
So you'd been painting for how many years by then?
Oh, I've been painting since I was 20.
Okay.
You know, as far as that goes. But I was awarded a residency for a month at the Constance Saltonstall Foundation for the Arts, which was just 5 artists were there, 2 visual artists, a writer, a poet, and a photographer. It was really cool. And he'd come up on Sundays. They wouldn't allow anybody else on the grounds. Came up on Sundays, and one Sunday he just said, we had a puppy then. He brought the puppy up, and he said, I want to take pottery.
Never mentioned it before.
Never.
Really?
But he'd been thinking about it, he said.
Been thinking about it, but So,
what did you think her reaction was going to be? I mean, she's an artist, so you thought that...
I'm I think I was hoping that it was going to be favourable, and it was, and she's been very supportive all the way through.
What if she said, no, you're not? There's only room for one artist in this family.
Well, yeah, that never came into the equation.
You don't just decide to be a potter. You have to work at it. You don't just decide to be an artist or writer. You have to work at it. So,
you know, I'm really excited to talk to you for another reason. I've been using an example for decades that, you know, I challenge people to think about the people that they know that want to be rock stars, or the people they want to know that be actors, or the people they want to know that want to be movie stars, and people start popping in your head. Then I say, tell me the people that want to be potters. Tell me the people that want to be leather crafters. Tell me the people that want to be marionettists. Those are the people that really want to do it. So that nobody, you just said it. When you say I want to be a potter, there's 90, according to the math, there's a 98% that you want it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Truth.
Yeah.
So, but what is that? What makes a potter? What is the formula that makes you want to be a potter?
You got to have a lot of patience, and there's things in life that I haven't got patience for, but pottery I do have patience for, because I think the good thing about pottery is if you mess up, you just throw the clay to one side, we recycle it, and we use it again. It's not as if that's the end of it. That clay can be used again, and it's so, you know, the first 5 years I was learning and, you know, developing skills and that sort of thing, and then slowly our studio is involved in an annual show out in Montrose, which supports the Susquehanna Library, and you know, I put a few pieces in there, and a couple of pieces sold, and I thought, wow, you know, and it's gone from there. And I'm learning all the time. So I don't throw at home. As you're probably aware, Robeson Museum.
Mm-hmm.
At the back, behind Robeson, there is the old Carriage House, which is Clayworks, which is a community-based pottery studio. So that's where I did classes, and that's where I still do classes. But I'm also I progressed to I'm a studio assistant. So I go there, I load kilns, I unload kilns, I mix glazes, I pug clay, and I have to do X amount of hours each semester to fulfill my commitment. So, yeah, but on the plus side, when the studio is closed, I can go in and throw, and it's a win-win situation. It really is. So, and it's you know, and I whereas Joanne's a painter, she paints, she's in a studio, and she likes the solitude of that. But with pottery, there's more of being in that environment, there's a bit more of a camaraderie.
Now, using that example as a painter, what do you do? And you're probably so advanced this never happens. But what do you do if a painting doesn't go the right way? Do you can't scrap the canvas, or do you scrap the canvas? What does a painter do when you're painting and you go, I don't like this?
Once it goes that direction, I mean, lots of times you can paint over it, but I like starting fresh and clean.
Really?
The other great thing that he started doing, probably at the same time he started doing pottery, is stretching my canvases, gessoing them, and doing all the grunt work. So he does a lot of grunt work for me. So if I'm really dissatisfied, I will say I'd like another, and he coughs it up.
Does that help? Does that help the fact that you're not so? I don't want to stretch another one, so I'll make this work. Do you find you push yourself more with the freedom of knowing you don't have to?
It's more like I know when I start a painting if it's direction. You never know how it's going to end up. If you know how it ends up, there's no point in doing it.
All right, so let me throw a mean question then. If you're producing the same piece over and over and over, is it art?
Absolutely.
Why?
You've come, like she like for this particular project, she would come up with a personalized piece for that show, for that organization. She's designed it. She's yeah. So the art part of it, yeah, yes, absolutely, yeah. She's come up with the concept, the design, what she wants to do. It's her skills,
That wasn't a mean question. That was a good question.
Was it? I didn't mean.
That's the there's a big question: is pottery art or is it craft? Okay, that opens up a whole new can of worms.
Give me an example of something that is craft that isn't art.
People who are basket weavers and that sort of thing. That's
craft.
But is it?
But it's very unusual to have. I mean, there are couples that are doctors together. There are couples that are in medicine together. Maybe it's not such a big deal. I've yet to see a creative couple, a creative married couple. Usually, there's one that has to support the other. They're in, but I guess maybe it's not that big of a deal. I mean, you have two couples that are both, in medicine, or couples that are both in real estate, or couples that are both. Is just so normal to you that you don't even think about it? Being a creative couple with your own.
We're not competing, when we married and got together, I was in the art mode at that time, and so I was still developing as an artist during that time, and so when he took it on, it was like he has a studio to go to. It like he said, his is much more. It has a little more of a social component and everything.
Would it have been different if he decided to paint?
Probably.
Would it?
Yeah. I'm sure it would have been. Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to share the studio.
No,
I mean, that would be the difference. Yeah. It would just be like he'd have to set up his own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the good thing is that I'm in a studio away from the house and that sort of thing. Whereas clay and paintings, they're not conducive to be in the same room, dust and all that sort of thing.
And he was working with his hands before he started the pottery because he was doing my stretchers.
Yeah.
And you get the wood. He goes down to the lumber yard, gets the wood, measures it out. I tell him the sizes I want.
Yeah.
So
that's the real deal. You don't go to Michael's and buy the.
Yes, no, we make the stretchers, the stretchers from scratch.
And then when we talk about the community in art, we started helping out with First Night Binghamton. Do you remember that when that happened?
Absolutely.
And so that was something we did as a team. Making puppets, and we held workshops, and we did a lot for First Night. Every year we did something, and there was even though I was the art part of it. You have your team with you.
That may be
you
that.
Need a team.
Who knows? I never realized that might have got the juices flowing in.
Really?
That might, because we was doing something. I'd go in there and just say, "Well, we need this done," and I'd paint, and she was doing large pieces that we
were doing installation
pieces, so I'd help with that, and yeah.
Now, creativity can be found in almost every possible form, and here's a perfect example of how deep this Binghamton thing goes. So when Jordan Jika of the Old World Deli on Court Street learned that I had included some great memories of his place in the new book, he put his creative talents to work. He tested, he shaped, and he came up with the most incredible, the most amazing sandwich ever. And then, and this is the coolest thing in the world, by the way, he humbled me by naming it the Mount Everett. So I have a sandwich named after me now, which, like I said, is the coolest thing in the world. But come on, where else does this happen? Jordan told me about the moment when he knew he got this sandwich just the way he wanted. He tried this, then he tried that, this didn't work, and that wasn't just right. And when I listened and smiled, he said, "Hey, I take all the parts of a sandwich pretty seriously." And he said it no differently than if he was talking about notes, brushstrokes, or words. So we headed to the second book event and began to analyze what we had learned over these 2 days. So one key element is that Binghamton artists don't seem to wait for permission. They just do it. They don't worry about getting a grant or having money for promotion or even that no one will come to their event, because they really don't care about that and it takes too much time. If they want to play music, they invite people to someone's living room. If they want to read poetry, they go to a cafe or an open mic. If they want to write and perform a play, they find a room, get some chairs, and just do it. And I think that's a major key to this entire movement. Binghamton artists don't spend time dreaming. They just do. And they don't seem to be motivated by getting rich, getting famous, or being discovered. They just want to play music, act, paint, perform, and create, as well as be involved with what others are creating around them. And actually, they may hunger for that even more. I had one more stop to make before I went home, which brings me to the final question about that very word. Home. For me, is home still in Binghamton? Or is it now in Delaware? And that's easy. Binghamton is no longer home. That status changed when the last of the people, of my people, were gone. My mother, my father, my sister, my nephew, and my son. When those people left, we didn't go back home. It was just the place where the good memories were kept. Which also brings me to the primary complaint I have about these last 2 days, and about Binghamton. See, when you leave a place, you expect it to have the common decency to wind down and stop without you. I mean, how could it go on if you're no longer there? But Binghamton didn't do that. It moved on. It prospered. And it got creative.